What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I want to share my thoughts on an episode of Dr. Phil that I recently watched. Now, for those of you who don't know who Dr. Phil is, he's essentially a psychiatrist who's a talk show host in the United States of America. He's become extremely popular in Canada, the United States, and probably the entire English-speaking world as well. I consider him a very intelligent man, and I can also consider him a man who is not ignorant. He allows discussions to take place on his platform that you wouldn't see anywhere else on television. So this episode, I was very surprised that they allowed this on mainstream TV. Okay, so it had to do with the potential for an American Civil War, or a second American Civil War. He had 5 guests on the show. 2 of the guests were from Texas. They were leading a secession movement in Texas called Texit. Okay. The next guest was from New Hampshire, and she was leading a secession movement in New Hampshire. The next guest, they didn't say where she came from, but she was essentially just ringing alarm bells as to, excuse me, as to what this is going to happen. A civil war is going to happen between now and 2030. She was essentially just raising red flags. Then he had a 5th guest, and this gentleman was arguing that all 4 of the other guests are totally wrong. This can't happen in America, and he gave his reasons for it. Now, the first 2 guests from Texas and the lady from New Hampshire and the other lady, all 4 of them were arguing that the reasons, there's going to be a disunion of the union is that there's too much corruption at the federal level in Washington, D.C. The nation's debt the national debt is out of control. It's something like 32 trillion. And the last thing, of course, was the uncontrolled illegal immigration. Now, unfortunately, one of the guys from Texas, the reason he joined the movement, the Texit movement, was because his son was killed or murdered in a very brutal fashion by an illegal immigrant. But it wasn't just no ordinary illegal immigrant. It was a guy who had been deported 3 times from the US and somehow found his way back in. And, he didn't know his son, never met him in his life. And he just decided, at a red light to blow his brains out for absolutely no reason. And I don't want to say absolutely no reason, because there's obviously a reason, you guys. There's some underlying factors that, people with experience can understand. Not ignorant people, by the way. Not people, holed up in their little mansions, or who have never been in poor communities, or have never, had it hard in their lives, right? So it was unfortunate. And this is, this guy joined the Texit movement because of that. That was basically the straw that broke the camel's back from. And then there was the woman from New Hampshire, and she was telling the guys from Texas, you can't go into this with the mindset of civil war. She was saying, your rhetoric is aggressive and you can't think like that. And she was arguing that we need to have a peaceful divorce, right? And then I immediately thought, when have you ever seen a peaceful divorce? My parents were divorced. I've seen other people get divorced. And if it wasn't for the police and the judges and the courts, they would have took the gloves off. They would have been at each other's necks, okay? Especially when it comes to finance. And we all know that the wealth comes from the land, all right? So, the guys from Texas understood this, and they understood, well, even if you started it out as a peaceful divorce, it would eventually lead to civil war anyway. So why not just get to the point? You know what I'm saying? And they just kind of looked at her and shrugged it off like, this woman doesn't know anything she's talking about. And maybe a peaceful divorce could work, but at this level, I don't think so, because, you know, the people you deal with in politics, trust me, I mean, they're nasty, you guys. There's no, like, you know, all kinds of things going on, and it's almost like lawlessness, essentially, okay? Now, there then was the next lady, and she was saying, you know, she was also giving the reason that, you know, that the Americans are spending all this money overseas in wars and all sorts of things, you know, in aid in other countries and stuff like this. And yet there's people starving and living on the streets in the United States of America, which is true. And on top of that, they didn't mention one other thing, which is really important. And that is the racial tensions, the historical racial tensions in America. And just the other day, you guys, there was a black dude, a young black man from North Carolina, who's found hanging on a tree. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When the parents and the friends were calling the cops as to what happened, and you know, the cops were telling them, oh, he committed suicide, right? And they didn't believe it, so they were like, you know, and the cops were like, look, he bought a rope at Walmart and he committed suicide. So then they naturally asked for the receipts, for the video evidence at Walmart of him buying the rope, and they couldn't produce that, so they changed the story. And then they changed the story a third time, okay? So you can tell that these people are in a panic. It was a lynching, you guys, like, you know. And now on the news, like the North Carolina news, they're saying, you know, don't jump to conclusions. They're basically trying to pacify the population. And, you know, there's no, you know, the police already lied 2 times about it. So obviously they're trying to hide something here. And the fact that this is not making national news, and they're trying to, you know, kind of distract everybody with this whole Diddy thing going on, like Puff Daddy and his, you know, sex parties or whatever. They're putting this all over the news, but they're not talking about this. How I found out about it was these locals from North Carolina on YouTube posting it, okay? It wasn't the news people. It was just local people, you know, posting this on YouTube.
Hey y'all, I would have never thought I had to make this kind of post, but my family desperately needs your help. This is my little cousin, Javion McGee. He's from Chicago, Illinois. He was 21 years old and would have been 22 in a few weeks. He was found hanging from a tree in Henderson, North Carolina yesterday. He drove trucks, so that was his reason for even being out there. The police officers are trying to say that he went to Walmart and purchased the rope and hung himself. We obviously don't believe that, and we are just asking for your help to push his story out there. This isn't covered on any local platforms. No news stations, radio, none of that. So we're trying to push it out there. We really need your help. The police officers in the coroner's office are giving us a hard time, not allowing his mom to identify the body. At one point, they told her she can't identify the body due to COVID. And then the next day, today, they told her the father has to give her permission for that, which he said that he would. She asked if they could send her pictures at least. They told her yes, and then turned around and told her, oh, I don't think that you want to see your son like that. This is just very devastating for my family, and we really, 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 really need to push this story out there. So if y'all could please repost this video, keep saying his name, Javion McGee, hashtag justice for Javion, and we are going to fight for him, and we are standing behind my cousin 100%, and they're not getting away with this. So please share this video. Thank you.
And they're afraid, you know, the authorities are afraid that this could be the final, you know, the final straw that broke the camel's back, because, you know, Black people are fed up. They're fed up, you know. And it's not just in the US, it's here in Canada as well, in Europe, okay? Guys, it's we're not going to talk about it anymore. It's just there's no reason to, okay? Like, they know they're in the wrong. They know what they're doing is wrong. It's not it's not a mystery anymore. It's not like, you know, in my master's class, I remember the woman, the professor, you know, it was a literacy course, you know, childhood literacy, because I have a master's in education, and she was she would bring up race, and I was like, well, what does this have to do with race, But she would always, say, well, things have changed a lot, but they're not going to change overnight, And she would always say this like every 3 or 4 lectures, like it was like a TV commercial. She was constantly hammering away. And I was just thinking to myself, like, why would she bring that up? This is a literacy course, on how to get children reading at a very young age to enrich their vocabulary and improve their communication skills when they get older, right? And she just kept bringing this up, and I couldn't understand why. And then I finally realized, like, it's probably because there's a few colored folks in the class, and they're trying to buy more time because they know they're not going to change, you guys, right? Now, I don't want to say they're not going to change, but you guys, like, look, come on. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's, how long are you going to wait? You're going to wait till the next generation? You know what I'm saying? Like, here I am, over 40, I have a master's degree, and they still won't let me in. You know what I'm saying? And, they have no problems, like, bringing in people from Nigeria and Africa and stuff, newcomers, like India or whatever, and giving them good positions in City Hall or these places, because they don't really know much as to how the system really works here, right? Whereas we, grew up here our entire lives, and, we know it inside out, right? And, on another note, I have to mention that, Black people themselves have to start taking responsibility for what they do, right? Because, I go on these sites sometimes like World Star Hip Hop or other sites that I'm not even going to mention because I know they're going to take them down if I mention them. Like, these are sites that essentially show very nasty things that are going on around the world. Places like Haiti, places like, the war in Ukraine, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to really, I wouldn't recommend that you watch that, right? You got to be very headstrong to watch it. You don't want to let images like that into your mind. But, you'll see on these websites, Black people in America, and they're just behaving, in a fashion that, well, why would anyone take you seriously? Why would anyone take us seriously? Like, you've got women twerking in the middle of the street and outside of cars and stuff. And, it's just like, just doing things that, devalue the human being, right? So, I can understand that perspective as well. But when I weigh, the scales, it's still, there's still a lot of inequity, right? So anyway, that's for another video. But they didn't mention this in Dr. Phil, in that episode. They didn't mention anything about it. Maybe they weren't allowed to. Maybe they, and in all fairness, you guys, Dr. Phil has actually had these discussions on other episodes. I mean, but I don't think he wanted to bring that in with the idea of civil war, right? Here we have this, the fifth gentleman, and he's saying, this can't happen. You people are wrong. And he gives the reasons of, the federal government has too many interests within these states for you to secede. So they've got the National Guard, they've got the institutional buildings like, national healthcare centers, the FBI, all these, policing centers, and, the tax offices. And they've got a whole bunch of federal employees within these states, and they can't just pull them out overnight. It's got to be a gradual process. And he said, by the time it's all said and done with, it would take too long, and it would be detrimental to both sides financially, that they would eventually work something out anyway to avoid any financial downfalls. Okay, or something along these lines. But he was arguing that, this can't happen in the United States. And he was also saying that these problems exist in all countries, right? Which is true to a certain extent, but all countries don't have a $32 trillion debt. And I get it, everybody will argue, oh, well, the United States has 350 million people, you got to compare it like that. But at the same time, you've got to understand that a lot of the population doesn't even have sufficient savings in their bank accounts, let alone the population that's on food stamps. They can't even afford to buy food, right? So, if they were required to pay the national debt overnight, they wouldn't be able to, all right? The rich would just flee. They're not going to pay it. They're going to take their money and flee, all right? The next thing I want to talk about is Dr. Phil himself on the show, okay? Dr. Phil was supposed to be the neutral guy. He was supposed to be the guy who's letting both sides get their time to talk, making sure things don't get out of hand, so on and so forth. And throughout the show, he was, he tended to take the side of the guy who was arguing that this can't happen in the United States. Civil war is not going to happen. And I get it. Like, Dr. Phil is very successful. He has, a wonderful family. He's very rich. He probably has this huge mansion. He has a very good life. Why would he want that to end in America, right? He's got a lot of sway too. And I mean politically, people listen to this guy. Politicians listen to this guy, all right? So why would he want that to end? Like, of course he's going to take that side. At one point, he was looking at the guys from Texas and he was talking to them like they were his 8-year-old boys. Like, it was just, he looked at them and he wagged his finger like this and he said, "You're talking recklessly." It was funny. And, the guys from Texas, like, especially the leader guy, he just shrugged his shoulders like, in the typical kind of, he just looked like one of those guys that he was ready to go down, you know what I mean? And what was more interesting was his conclusion and the audience, their facial expressions. So Dr. Phil gave a conclusion at the end of the show, and he starts comparing the people who are saying civil war is going to happen in America to people who believe 9/11 was an inside job, to people who believe America never landed on the moon, to people who believe that the earth is flat. Okay, he was comparing them to these people, and he wasn't doing it in a direct fashion. He was implying it. You know what I mean? Like, sort of indirectly, And when he did that, what was most interesting was the audience. The audience was laughing, but it wasn't in a mocking fashion. It was in a fashion that expressed relief. You see? It expressed like, oh, like, we really needed to hear that, Dr. Phil. And, we really needed to hear that from a guy like you. Someone with credibility, someone with, that people listen to. And, you could see it in their faces. And I believe the reason they had that sort of relief, or that sigh of relief within their chuckles and their laughs, is because deep down in their hearts of hearts, they believed it. They believed that this was in the hearts of men within America. Okay, Civil War. All right. They believe it, you guys. They need someone to tell them, like, it's not true. It can't happen. Okay, like delusional people, like, like dictators, for example, they always think that it can't happen, or people who, have sex with all different kinds of people, who think they can never get AIDS, and you know what I mean? Like, it just can't happen to them, right? They always have that idea until it does, and then they're in a state of shock and they can't believe it, And if you looked in Dr. Phil's eyes, you could also see, or I don't know if you could see it, like, I encourage you to watch it yourself, but I could see it. I could see that he also believed it. Okay, he's a strong individual, this guy. He's got a poker face, he's got the eye of the tiger, and, he's strong, he's got guts. And I could see it. He was believing it as well, and he understood he had to get the idea out of the people's heads, okay? Because this guy's a psychiatrist. These psychiatrists, you wonder why they make six figures a year. It's because they know how it works, you guys. You can actually shape your environment through your thoughts, okay? Now, a lot of there's always these positive, you got to have a positive mind and, you're going to become rich and so on. No, I mean, there's a lot of other things involved too. You got to work hard. There's a lot of just common sense stuff involved, okay? It's not just that. But he understood in this case that he had to get this idea out of the people's minds, okay? Because your thoughts are going to shape your reality. And he understood as a psychiatrist, I've got to say this, it can't happen. These people are crazy, so on and so forth. And what Dr. Phil doesn't understand is that there's another element in this, which is called the Word of God. You see, whenever great nations collapse, the Lord God Almighty is always involved. His Word is always involved. And when He speaks it, nothing can stop it. Nothing. Not your psychiatric manipulation. None of this stuff can stop it, okay? There's one point in history where it was actually stopped, and that was in Nineveh. But it wasn't by any man, okay, or any person. It was by God's own compassion, okay? So we all know the story of, God calling Jonah, the prophet, to go and warn Nineveh as to what was coming if they didn't change their ways. Of course, Jonas didn't want to go there. He hated these people. Like, he really hated them. And I can understand why, because I can even imagine how those people were back then from experience that I have today. Okay, they were extremely wicked, extremely selfish. They make your heart literally twist into knots. Okay, and he hated them so much that he was just like, I want this to happen. You know what I mean? And God said, you're gonna go. He said, no, I'm not. And then eventually he was forced over there. We all know how, right? So he goes over there now, and he's warning the people, and they actually listen to him. The people of Nineveh listened to him, and they actually managed to divert God's judgment, okay? Which is unbelievable, because for God to go back on his word, because remember, he's a hearer of his own words. He's a man of his word, okay? And he actually turned back, okay? Now, eventually Nineveh did go back to their sin and their ways, and they were eventually destroyed anyway. But for the time being back then, they actually averted this, okay? So that's what Dr. Phil needed to tell his people. He needed to tell his people, like, you need to repent, okay? You need to change your ways. Your inequity, it's absurd, all right? Here in Canada as well. Here in Canada, they're always blaming Trudeau, like the right wing. They're always saying, oh, Trudeau, he's bringing all these people in from India so they'll work for cheaper or they'll work for less money. You see what I'm saying? But a lot of these industries that are hiring these Indians coming in, they're not leftists. They're actually conservatives, okay? So they're making money off of it too. You see what I'm saying? Essentially, it benefits the majority of the white population, okay? So once you understand the complexity of it, you understand that these people that are bickering back and forth within the senates and within the parliaments and stuff, it's all a show. It's all theater. These people have dinner with each other and stuff, okay? It's us suffering here on the front lines. So the Word of God cannot be trumped, okay? Regardless of your psychological tactics, okay? I understand that you can use these tactics to actually heal people as well. Someone who, is having bad thoughts and stuff like this, you can just tell them, like, this is not true, this is not true. And you can actually, like, heal them like that, okay? to change their perception of reality, okay? But in the end, it's only God that's going to get you through. It's not going to be like these psychiatrists and so on and so forth. They might be able to in the short term, but not in the long term. Anyhow, last point I want to make. We have to think to ourselves, what are the consequences to America collapsing? Okay? Whether it be civil war, whether it be financial collapse, what would be the immediate and the long-term consequences? So, me being in Canada, we can already understand that our biggest trading partner is America. And we know that a lot of the jobs provided here are because of American clients or American money, okay? They buy a lot of Canada's manufacturing, or the products or the resources Canada produces. Okay, so a lot of Canadians immediately would lose their jobs overnight like that. All right, so it wouldn't be good for us, but at the same time, it might be good for some of us, especially the ones who are mistreated. All right. It certainly wouldn't be good for the rich Canadians, all right? Now, they wouldn't feel it immediately, but eventually they would when the poor come knocking on their door, all right? And then you have to think, like, what would happen internationally? This is the big one. Of course, the American dollar, the whole global economy would collapse. I mean, people would just, because for people to go to another currency, it's not going to happen overnight, because they're going to be arguing with each other as to which nation's currency should be the standard or the reserve. A lot of people are going to say, well, the euro is going to be, but a lot of people would also argue that the Chinese yuan would be. So these things wouldn't happen overnight, okay? It would be a gradual process, and there would be bickering over it. There would be tensions over it, okay? And then you have to think, what would happen militarily? And we all know that China would take Taiwan like that. Russia would take the Soviet states like that. Now, you might think, oh, why is Russia having problems with Ukraine right now? And it's only because of the American weapons, you guys. That's essentially the only reason. Other than that, Russia would have taken Ukraine within the projected 3 days that they thought they could have taken it in. All right, but they would take all the Soviet states like that. And then there's Europe. There's Germany, the EU, which Germany essentially controls. They would become a very, noted power, okay? I would even say a superpower. Now, we all know that recently the EU, I think it was France and Macron, that they rang the alarm bell saying, we've got to have our own military-industrial complex. And it's because they understand that they cannot rely on the Americans any longer for providing weapons, okay? They can even see it. They can see the potential for America's collapse. And therefore, now they are starting to produce their own weapons in mass, okay? They have their own military-industrial complex. Then you have players like Saudi Arabia. They would also come up on the scene, all right? And they would have a lot of influence into Africa, especially East Africa, all right? But I think the biggest one of all, you guys, is obviously Israel. What would happen to Israel? And, we see what's happening today with Israel, bombing pretty much all its neighbors. It's almost like, imagine, like, this little country, it's like being in a shark's tank, and America's not there to protect it no more. And America's like this whale protecting it. America's not there anymore, and it's this little fish, and the sharks just come in and devour it, okay? You have Iran, you have Lebanon, you have Yemen, you have, even parts of Egypt, because Egypt is, has its own problems internally, with the Muslim Brotherhood and with the guy in power now. If they removed him, then, they would move in on Israel, okay? You also have Jordan. Jordan has some sort of peace treaty with Israel right now, but it's only because they get money from the West, okay? But I've spoken with people from Jordan on vacation before, traveling throughout, Eastern Europe, and they're livid about Israel, okay? They're absolutely livid. They believe that Israel is their land. They actually believe that, you guys. And what would happen in little Israel? That's the big question here. And who then would become the superpower? Okay, because I've worked in these countries, in these Eurasian and Eastern European countries, and you guys, they're on board full steam with this cashless idea. Okay, when I came back to Canada, I was surprised as to how many people still use cash here. Like, I was surprised that I can walk into a cell phone store and buy a SIM card without any ID. I don't need an ID. You see, so they still respect privacy rights here. Okay? In those countries, you cannot have a SIM card without a passport. All right? And it is a crime if someone buys a SIM card for you, okay, for your use with their passport, okay? Because everything is tied to that SIM card. Your banking, your fines, okay? One time when I was working in Kazakhstan, I got a fine for walking a German Shepherd. I was walking the Shepherd, and he didn't have a muzzle on, but it was a Shepherd. And, the cop stopped me in the park, and he said, that looks like a dangerous dog. I'm going to give you a ticket. So I said, okay, whatever. So, if you don't pay it within a certain amount of days, it doubles or whatever. So I didn't have the actual Kazakh ID to put on the bank app to actually pay for the ticket using the bank app. So I had to go physically to a bank, show them the ticket, and then they had to do it the old-fashioned way, to mail it to the police, mail it back, and then, that payment process went that way. But by that time, the discount for the ticket had expired or something along these lines, but I had already left the country. And when I was outside the country, you guys, on this one police officer, not some commissioner or some governing body, it was this one police officer. He had the power to say shut off his bank account. So here I am in a different country, and all of a sudden my bank card stops working. Okay, now luckily, the hotel I was in, they were like, okay, we believe you, so on. They let me stay until I could get it figured out. But just imagine, this is like a $40 ticket, okay? Like, it wasn't like, hundreds of thousands of dollars or something like this, and you're completely cut off. He had the power to do that, okay? And then I had to call him, and we communicated through emails and say, call the bank. I paid them already. And then a week later, finally, he's like, oh, we're so sorry, and so on and so forth. But it just goes to show you that these people in that part of the world, they're completely on board with it, okay? That, these countries over there, they tend to come from sort of a, communist background or dictatorial background. And the people are very submissive to the authorities over there, okay? The British know this, okay? The British are over there helping them structure their new government system, their courts and all that. And the only reason the West hasn't pulled this off here is because the people are educated enough to know what kind of power it gives the authorities, okay? And the people are educated enough to know that where this is going to lead to, okay? Because when you give these people this kind of power, they're just going to get drunk on it. And they're, no matter how honest they say they're going to be, it's nonsense. It's not, they're obviously going to do it to manipulate your life, to control your life, and to essentially completely enslave you. All right. So I think, jeepers. On one hand, maybe this would be a good thing, but on the other hand, you're like, whoa, well, what's the other option? That? I don't know. And Africans too, like, Africans, if you go to Africa, they'll gladly welcome this cashless kind of, these bank apps and stuff like this, but they don't have the mind like here in America or Canada, these people, these grassroots people who understand the value of freedom, okay, the value I mean, in Canada here, I can tell anybody off. Like, it's just, I can go online and say, you know, Trudeau's, you know, he's this or that, you know, or these politicians are all corrupt or something like this. If you did that in one of those countries, like, it was just, I mean, you here too, like, they'll manipulate your life to the point where, you know, you might have it hard as well. I encourage you to watch the episode of Dr. Phil and see for yourself. I thought it was an extremely interesting episode. And I thought it was worth taking note of. It's a serious matter. And we're living in very interesting times. Yeah. So until next time, thanks for watching.